ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
It's sometimes said you're not friends unless you're Facebook friends. Today, Erin Patterson's friends testified in her murder trial. I'm the ABC's court reporter, Kristian Silva.
And I'm Stephen Stockwell. It's Monday, the 5th of May, and we've just finished the fourth day of Erin Patterson's triple murder trial. Welcome to Mushroom Case Daily.
The prosecution argues she had travelled to nearby Loch and Outram, where there'd been sightings of death cap mushrooms.
She told doctors she fed her children leftovers but scraped the mushrooms off.
Police allege Ms Patterson refused medical treatment for both herself and her children.
Ms Patterson admits she lied to police about foraging for mushrooms and getting rid of the dehydrator.
So we are back for week 2 of the Erin Patterson trial. We had a huge week last week. We heard the opening statements, which took up all of Wednesday, rolling through that, hearing the story of, Erin Patterson, her relationships, how this lunch unfolded and the aftermath of that. And then we spent 2 days hearing from Erin's estranged husband, Simon Patterson. He was in the stand taking questions from both the prosecution and defence. And now we are here for week 2. It is Monday, the first day of this week. And Kristian, today it took a bit of a turn. Things were a little bit different to what we've heard so far. Can you give us like a 60-second wrap of what's happened and unfolded today?
Stocky, some of Erin Patterson's Facebook friends were called to give evidence in court, and they described how she regularly made comments about loving mushrooms. They also said Erin was pretty critical of her estranged husband, Simon. Speaking of Simon, his evidence on the stand continued. It was the 3rd day that he'd been answering questions. Again, he was quizzed about his strained relationship with his wife and some of the disagreements they had over money.
It was a really interesting day. We got through quite a bit. Again, we've had Simon giving evidence for 2.5. This was the 3rd day of his evidence, and then we heard from like you were saying, some of Erin Patterson's Facebook friends. And I want to get into these Facebook friends. I'd like to talk about this kind of community that Erin was a part of because these were true crime Facebook groups. So it started with a Facebook page related to the Kelly Lane story. So that was a very high profile murder in Australia. And so she was chatting with these women. There were other groups that kind of like popped off to the side of this. And the thing that surprised me as I was listening and following along to some of this was that it didn't really seem to be much conversation about true crime in these groups at all.
It seemed like it evolved, and the 3 friends that were called to the stand broadly said the same things about how these groups were formed, and it sounded like initially there was quite a large group, and then they were whittled down to smaller groups. And in the end, there was a core group of 5 who were chatting. It sounded like the conversation moved to things like politics, current affairs, their own personal lives as well. This was also during COVID. So obviously a lot of people were going through some tough times during the pandemic, and the friends said that Erin regularly talked about her difficult relationship with her estranged husband, Simon.
Yeah, and there was also a lot of talk about her relationship with her kids as well, like really painting her as someone who loved her kids, would talk about her kids a lot.
That's right. One of the friends, Daniela Barclay, described Erin as a wonderful mother and said that Erin's life, according to what she was told anyway, heavily revolved around her children.
Yeah, nice. And it was interesting as well because, obviously lots of talk about family, life, all the things going on in that and associated with it, but also mushrooms.
Yeah, well, it is the biggest topic of this trial.
Yeah.
And I guess we've been focusing on it in the context of the lunch. But it turns out, according to these witnesses, that the topic of mushrooms and Erin Patterson go hand in hand and are linked well before the lunch. So we can go through some of that now.
Because there was a talk about like the dehydrator, and this we heard a little bit about in the opening statements. But this is something that Erin seemed like quite proud of acquiring and talking about it in these Facebook groups.
Yeah, well, one of the friends said that Erin, quote, seemed to really like mushrooms, and several of them said that she was really happy about this dehydrator that she had bought in 2023. And they said she'd been using it to dehydrate mushrooms on several occasions. There was a message that was actually flashed up on the court screen, and this is a message that Erin Patterson, I think, has sent to the group or perhaps just to one of them, where she says, "I've been hiding powdered mushrooms in everything. Mixed it into chocolate brownies yesterday. The kids had no idea." And on top of that, Erin Patterson was posting pictures of the dehydrator to the chat group. There was a grainy sort of black and white photo, which was again flashed up on the court screen. And from what I could tell from my vantage point, the dehydrator had several shelves, and we were told that there were mushrooms on those shelves. It was a little bit difficult to see. There was also another photo of chopped up button mushrooms that Erin has sent to this group. So it did come up. And the other thing that came up in this chat group before the fatal lunch was the topic of beef Wellingtons.
Yeah, so this was really interesting because it sounded like, when we're talking about this group, and this is something I found really interesting about this group, was that it was much more of a community than like a general, posting about this and then having a little conversation.
Random saying all sorts of things.
Yeah, they were really sort of asking each other for advice and talking about things. And there was this point where Erin was like, "Hey, I'm thinking about cooking a beef Wellington. Has anybody ever made one of these before?"
Yeah, she was seeking advice, and several of these friends said cooking was another one of those topics that they like to chat about. And one of the witnesses said that several of them owned a cookbook, Recipe Tin Eats. I'm told it's a pretty popular cookbook. I believe the chef behind it all was at the centre of another news story last week, unrelated to the case, but a weird coincidence. But yes, apparently a shared love of cooking, and Erin Patterson was asking for advice also around the kind of meat to use in the beef Wellington. Admittedly, I'm not an expert on this, but she was asking what kinds of cuts would work. And another friend also said that she gave Erin Patterson some advice about how to do the pastry and when to put it in the oven. Again, this is all kind of above my head, but people who know beef Wellington probably will understand what this whole discussion was about.
Yep. I think people who know beef Wellington will also be horrified at one of the jokes from one of the witnesses today who talked about the idea of having a tofu Wellington.
Yes, the tofu Wellington.
Which sounded like it went down like a lead balloon in this Facebook group.
Yeah, and that got a few laughs from people in the court. So it was one of the lighter moments. I think she was vegetarian.
That was the purpose of it, yes. So she was not just generally opposed to Wellingtons. It was, her approach to it. And like I was saying before, like there was this sort of social space that these groups kind of existed in, I suppose. And as well as cooking and family and there was also a lot of conversation about Simon. And it seemed to kind of paint us a pretty different picture of the way that Simon had been talking about his relationship with Erin.
Well, up until this afternoon, we only had one witness giving evidence in this trial, and it was Simon Patterson. So we're starting to see some different perspectives come out. Now, bear in mind, these witnesses, Erin's Facebook friends, they've never met her in person. So they're going off what she's telling them, and she was telling them that Simon was the kind of person who apparently, according to one witness, Christine Hunt, was coercive, and the word Christine Hunt used was abusive.
Ooh.
And Miss Hunt said that there was this tension that Erin Patterson had with her husband because Erin was an atheist, Simon Patterson is a devout Baptist, and Miss Hunt said that effectively Erin Patterson was holding herself out to be this sort of church-going Christian, but behind her extended family's back, she was telling her mates in the Facebook group that she didn't necessarily believe in God. So clearly another point of tension there.
Yeah, there was that sort of religious side of it was again discussed in relation to the to that Facebook group and stories that Erin was telling the people in these groups. Also a lot about, well, not a lot, but a part of it about Simon Patterson's lack of cleanliness.
Yeah, that came up and that was awkward. And again, this was in the context of Erin complaining about her estranged husband. So one of the witnesses said that she did complain that she didn't think he kept a clean house. And that was all said while Simon Patterson was in the public gallery having finished his evidence. So he heard that said about him. I think the one thing that made it less awkward were all of these Facebook friends, perhaps fittingly, were giving evidence virtually via video link. They weren't there in the flesh, and seemingly to this day have never laid eyes on Erin Patterson, but have plenty to say about her and have spoken to her in the past.
Simon, when he was hearing this, was he reacting in any specific way, or was he keeping a bit of a poker face?
Simon was pretty level-headed. There was no visible reaction, and even from what I could tell from Erin Patterson, who was sitting about 2 metres behind me, I didn't see any big noticeable reactions from her as she heard her friends talking about their past interactions.
Yeah. Was there any conversation with the Facebook friends about the lunch, or like any conversations following the lunch? There were bits I was sort of dipping in and out
a lot of conversations in the lead up to the lunch about recipe preparation, but only one witness, Jenny Hay, was asked about the aftermath. Now, this witness said that Erin Patterson actually spoke to her over the phone a couple of days after the lunch, and Erin Patterson said that she was sick in hospital, and she also said that she got the mushrooms from an Asian grocer. Now, people will remember this is one of the topics that came up at the start of the trial in the prosecution openings. It's not something that we've had in detail in the evidence yet, but given the prosecution and the defence have flagged the origin of the mushrooms in the meal as part of their openings, it will be something that we'll get to explore later on.
Yeah. It's worth understanding as well today that, you know, while we had these Facebook friends giving evidence, they were all giving evidence for about 20 minutes or so each. We also had the testimony of Simon Patterson wrapping up today as well. And Simon, by comparison, has given evidence now for 2.5 days. So we've gotten a lot more detail from Simon. What was he talking about in the last parts of his evidence?
Simon Patterson was quizzed again by Colin Mandy, the defence barrister, and he was taken to his conversations that he had with Erin a couple of days after the lunch when she was in hospital. And the kids were also in hospital as doctors tried to check to see if they were also sick from poisoning. And Colin Mandy put to Simon Patterson that he said something to her. And that was that Simon brought up the dehydrator and said to Erin, "Is that what you used to poison them?" And the them being a reference to the lunch guests, of course. Now, Simon responded to say, "I did not say that to Erin." Now, I guess to put this in a bit of a timeline, this conversation happened a couple of days after the lunch. About 5 or 6 days after the lunch, when the police went searching for items at the local tip, they found the dehydrator. So that's just a little bit of context there. He's allegedly raised this with her. Of course, he denies that. And then fast forward a few days and the dehydrator ends up in the tip.
Interesting. Where else did the conversation with Colin Mandy SC and Simon Patterson go today? I mean, I was sort of again in and out of some of the conversations and some of the hearings today, but there was a bit of talk, I think, around some money that Erin Patterson missed out on because of their relationship status.
We did bring this up earlier and it has popped up a few times. It's really about the tension that these two had over money. And I'm no tax expert, so you'll excuse me for my sort of lack of total understanding of this issue, but Simon Patterson changed his relationship status on his tax return to separated. The net effect of that seems to be that Erin Patterson feels like she's suffered financially as a result. In text messages that were shown to the court, she said she believed that change meant she could no longer claim about $15,000 a year in tax benefits, but then she also claimed that because they'd been separated for quite a long time, but had not actually listed that separation, that there was probably in excess of, I don't know, maybe in excess of $90,000 of child support payments that she felt that she missed out on.
Wow.
And she was venting about this in a different chat group. This was a group with the Patterson family themselves. So Simon and his two parents were also in that group. And Erin wrote, and I quote, And this is also in front of the parents, by the way. I foolishly trusted him to do right by me and the kids when it came to the crunch. And she said that in front of Simon's parents. Obviously, I'm sure he wasn't too thrilled about that. There was another reference to a message which we didn't really get to the bottom of, but the reason I bring it up is that Simon Patterson became kind of emotional when this topic emerged. Simon said that Erin Patterson sent some kind of extremely inflammatory message to this group chat. That message was not shown to the court, and Simon Patterson did not explicitly say what it was about, but he was saying that it was a message that was having a crack at him, and he said that if his mum had seen the message, she would have been really upset by it, but it sounds like she might not have seen the message. So a bit cryptic there.
Yeah.
But that was probably the most emotional Simon was while on the stand today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
one other thing he said, actually, and you'll remember back to the fake cancer claims that Erin Patterson made.
Yeah.
Simon was also asked about why he didn't really seem to take this seriously. And he said, well, Erin Patterson flagged having some medical issues about 2 weeks before the lunch and had said this is the reason why she wanted to get everyone together.
Yep.
And he basically said that, well, if she organised this thing 2 weeks ago and it was about medical stuff, he didn't feel it was that serious if it wasn't going to be discussed properly for 2 weeks. And he said he didn't feel fully confident that there was a serious medical issue to discuss at all. So again, that topic rears its head.
Yeah, I've heard about that a couple of times now, so that's interesting. Well, Simon Patterson has finished his evidence now. We have a couple of audience questions I'd love to quickly jump into because one of them does relate to Simon. It's from Susan. She's emailed mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au and she's asked a quick question. $40 a month maintenance from Simon seems odd. Are you able to throw more light on why it was such a little amount?
This is the child support payments that he started paying after this whole separation thing. What Simon's told the court is that that figure was set by whoever it is that sets the child support payments. I'll say the government to make it easy.
Yep.
That wasn't a figure that he set, and he fully acknowledged that $40 a month is not going to really go very far when it comes to covering kids' private school fees. There was a dispute over the school fees, but he says that eventually he ended up paying 50% of them.
Okay, yep. We've also had another question here from the legal studies students at
hello.
Penley and Essendon Grammar School. Hello, Penley and Essendon Grammar School. Thank you for getting in touch. They would like to know, how do we know that the jury can be impartial given how widely publicised the case was prior to trial?
A great question and very, very relevant. This goes back to the very first day of the trial when that jury was empanelled. Justice Christopher Beale was speaking to the entire jury panel and told them, if you cannot be impartial, you cannot sit on this trial. So that means if they've already forged opinions about this case, if they've been obsessively reading the stories or listening to the podcast or whatever it is, they're not suitable for this jury. They need to be the kinds of people that can weigh up the evidence, also ignore all of the media reporting and even just the conversations at the weekend with their family. They need to put all of that aside and just look at what's presented to the court to make a decision. The courts do give juries a fair amount of trust. There's a belief in the legal system that juries can follow the instructions set by judges, and there's faith put in them for that. So that is why we have a jury trial, and they're given those instructions and expected to follow them.
Thank you. If you have any questions you'd like us to answer, please get in touch. mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au. We are reading all of your questions. There are a lot of them, I must say. So, it's taking us a bit of time, but we are getting to all of them, yeah. There's a few that we're getting through that are things that we just can't get into. We can't speculate around aspects of the case and things like that. So if we haven't read out some of your questions, that's why.
And there are some questions that we've received which I'm confident we'll be able to address. It's just not right at this minute. It may come up later on in the trial.
Yeah, I've got a very detailed spreadsheet that we can refer back to, but I won't bore you with that. But yes, thank you for getting in touch. Please reach out if you have any questions you'd like us to answer.
So we're expecting more witnesses tomorrow. We haven't been told who they are, so it'll be a bit of a surprise when we rock up to court tomorrow and find out who'll be taking the stand.
Whoever it is, we'll be here with another episode of Mushroom Case Daily tomorrow.
Mushroom Case Daily is produced by ABC Audio Studios and ABC News. It's presented by me, the ABC's court reporter Kristian Silva, and producer Stephen Stockwell.
Our executive producer is Claire Rawlinson, and props to Kristian's boss, Sarah Jench, Audio Studios manager Eric George, and our true crime colleagues Tim Roxburgh, Rachel Brown and Yasmin Parry for helping make this show a reality. This episode was produced on the land of the Gunai-Kurnai people.
You've been listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.